we need to talk about resumes and AI because there are a lot of people who are giving really conflicting perspective. And I'm a hiring manager. I've been hiring in this cycle, and I have fairly strong opinions about where AI can effectively be used by applicants and where it should not be used. So I want to break that down into two lists, and I'm going to go into a fair bit of granular detail. That's what a nice long form video like YouTube is about. So first, a good list of things that you should not be using a large language model for during your job application process. Are you ready? Number one, do not use a large language model to write your whole resume for you. Don't do it. The reason why is that large language models have a house style. Unless you are reasonably adept, an expert at prompting large language models with a system prompt that substantially changes their house style so that it sounds very, very, very much like you, and it's distinctive and it's individual, then don't do it. And if all of that didn't make sense to you, then you're not using a system prompt that is going to help you, and you should definitely not be doing it. Fundamentally, unless you have a fair bit of work put in, an LLM is going to sound like an LLM. Claude has a house style. Gemini has a house style. OpenAI and ChatGPT have a house style. Do not let that house style into your resume because so many other people are doing so. You end up sounding like all the other applicants. Is that what you want? Is that what you're looking to do, is to not stand out from the crowd? Because that is typically what happens when you let an LLM write your resume. All right, that's number one. Number two, if there are questions from the company to you during the applicant process, don't use an LLM to answer them. Same reason. If you use an LLM, you have a house style, and for a second reason, those questions are typically designed to measure incisive and careful thinking. And next token predictors, which is what a large language model is, are not going to give you the clarity of thought that you need to stand out. It's going to feel like word salad. Maybe not inaccurate word salad, but word salad anyway. And if it feels even a little bit fudgy or a little bit flabby or a little bit sloppy, then the person reading the response is going to think that's the way you communicate, that you're not incisive, that you're not concise, that you're not clear. And you don't want that. Again, it's not helping you stand out. Okay, third thing. Do not use an LLM to tune your resumes. I know it's really tempting when you have a lot of applications to do to just say to the LLM, please tune the resume to match this job description. But the problem is you lose all of your own style in that process, and the house style comes back. And the LLM isn't necessarily inserting the keywords that you want it to insert on the correct bullets. And if you are reading several hundred resumes, you start to get an ear for when people are using keyword packing. And LLMs tend to be not super subtle about hiding the keyword packing. And that's actually one of the things you have to do to write a good resume. Yes, you want to match the keywords, but it needs to feel natural. And in my experience, an LLM written resume has trouble adjusting and tuning and bringing those keywords in without making it reasonably obvious what's going on. And it does stand out if you've read a bunch of resumes. All right, number 4. Don't use an LLM for the final phase of preparation for interviews. And I'll come back to this theme, but at the end of the day, the reason why interview preparation is so important is because your brain needs to actually speak something out to sound natural. So don't use it for interview prep, or you're going to sound like you're reading from a large language model output. You're going to sound really robotic. And yes, I know there are some people who literally get the LLM answers printed onto a screen while someone is interviewing them. And it is obvious, and people do know, and it's a huge red flag because we need you to think creatively and think incisively and think for yourself. And so if you are practicing with an LLM, you are unlikely at the final stage of practice to be able to articulate your answer in your style, using your words and your voice in a way that feels natural. So that final phase of interview practice has to be with another human, has to be with a mirror if you don't have another human to practice with. Okay. And then the last one that I would say that you don't do is do not use a large language model that has search capabilities such as ChatGPT or even Perplexity for company research that is high fidelity. So if you're doing interviews and you get to like the second round or beyond, you need to have a really good idea of what the company does so that they can imagine working with you because you have so much corporate knowledge, right, already. It is hard to get that level of tactile, fine-grained detail if you are using an LLM as an interface. And the reason for that is that they are designed to summarize. And when they summarize, they do lose detail. And you need that detail to stand out from the crowd. So don't use them for that really high fidelity research that you need to do to truly stand out in subsequent rounds of interviews. Okay, that was a list of 5 different things you should not be using large language models for. But there are things you should be using large language models for in the application process. And that's the second list. And that's what we're going to get to now. So what you should use large language models for is, one, I think they're great tools for role fit analysis. If you want to think about, does this role fit my skills? Does this role fit my job description? Is there a way I can quantify that or measure that? Yes, there are pre-built tools like Teal that do that. You can also prompt and work with a large language model just in the chatbot experience and get a great result just by having them read the 2 documents, a job description printout and then your resume, and starting to have a conversation about the fit and the weaknesses and the gaps. That's a super useful way to use a large language model to understand whether you fit a role. Another useful way to understand an LLM, this is number 2, get them to tell you what is distinct about that role that doesn't fit the other standard job descriptions. Again, you're asking the LLM to look through its enormous experience. I guarantee you it has read more job descriptions in your job family than you have. Ask it to look at an individual JD and say, what is distinct about this? And then press it and make sure that it's really clear. That's a great use for a large language model because that will help you to read and understand intent, because the large language model can go beyond just saying this is a distinct sentence. It can tell you this is a sentence and this is my supposition based on my extensive corpus of text, the whole internet of text, on what the intent behind that bullet was. And it may not be 100% right, but it's right enough that it will give you a clue that you might not pick up on otherwise. So I think it's a good use just to like understand what's distinct about resumes and help you analyze them rapidly, or understand what's distinct about job descriptions, because those are the ones you're looking at. So number 3, it's really helpful to identify missing keywords. And this goes in the same category of like comparing role fit. And so if you're comparing role fit, which is a different thing, you have to understand at a high level if the roles fit. That's number 1. Number 2, understand what's distinct about the role. We just talked about that. Number 3, if you're going to apply, do a second level of analysis between your resume and the job description and specifically look for missing keywords. And this is different than keyword packing. It's the first step. It's the analysis step where it calls out the missing keywords. LLMs do a great job at that. It may be on you to work in the keywords, but LLMs can help you pull them out and understand what you have to add in really fast. Okay. Number 4. LLMs are really good at helping you with blank page syndrome. So you know how I said earlier in this YouTube that you should not use a large language model for writing a whole resume. That's true. You should also not use it for those questions. I talked about that. But if you need a draft, it's a great drafter. It gets you past staring at a blank page, and that can accelerate you because there is nothing harder as a writer than just looking at the blank page and wondering where to start. We just don't have that problem, which is a 10,000-year-old problem, by the way. It's disappeared in 2024. We don't have blank page syndrome anymore, or we don't have to. Anybody can get off of the blank page immediately. And you should use a large language model for that. And then you should edit the heck out of it. All right. Number 5, you should be looking at how you can break through fluency blocks in your overall application process with a large language model. And I'm going to give you two examples. Oftentimes people don't understand networking, and they talk about, hey, how do I network? How do I network in my situation for my job role? How do I get past the shyness? Large language models are not going to give you personalized insight from someone who's done it before. But if you're getting past the blank page syndrome for a skill like networking, they are super helpful to give you a sense of what's in the box. And especially if you prompt them and ask them to think about it from a strategic perspective and a non-transactional perspective, which is how you should be networking, they're going to give you really thoughtful initial advice, like a first pass at advice. If you're looking to understand the skill in general, it can be helpful. And almost everyone has gaps in their skill set over the course of a job application process. There are areas where you are strong. Maybe you're really strong at resume editing, and areas where you're weak. Maybe that's networking. Maybe that's looking at other job sites besides LinkedIn. And so what you're weak at is actually getting the full top of funnel for job discovery. LLMs that's another thing they're good at. Like, you can talk to them and say, I don't know where else to go for jobs besides LinkedIn. Can you help me find some? That is a good use for something like Perplexity. Basically, you want to tune the LLM to give you a sense of how you break through that skill gap. It's not going to give you a high fidelity, excellent, super professional final answer on these things, but it will get you through that initial really painful feeling skill learning phase faster. And that's what you want. It's accelerating you, and that's what you should be looking for. Okay. And I also know at the top of this YouTube video, I talked about how you should not use large language models for the final phase of interview practice. And that is true. You should not be doing that. But you should be using large language models if you are feeling stuck and need to practice your initial interview structure. And so if you're doing the first half of interview prep where you're determining, do I have the anecdotes? Do the anecdotes match the anticipated questions? Do the anecdotes have the right structure to them so that someone who is a typical interviewer can understand what I mean? Am I using the STAR technique? Am I using the parade technique? Am I opening myself up to follow-up questions that are risky? LLMs are great as conversational tools to help you get through that initial phase of interview practice. So absolutely use them for that first half. And then when you actually need to feel natural and practice it verbally, that's when they're not helpful anymore. All right. I'm going to give you one final tip. I believe this is tip number 7 for how to use large language models in application prep and sort of the whole job search process. You know how I said earlier in the video that you should not be using a large language model such as Perplexity or such as ChatGPT with Browse for researching at a high level of fidelity your company that you're targeting? Great, don't do it. But you can use a large language model to get a high level view of the industry and the competitors for the company. Because again, that plays to the system's strengths. It allows it to look across the whole industry. I guarantee you it's read more articles than you have, and to synthesize it up. And if you're looking to synthesize and summarize a lot of detailed information that you found that maybe not publicly available on the internet. Maybe you've dug in the SEC's website and you found 10K filings for these companies, and they're recent, so they're outside the training data set for the LLM. Throw them in. It's going to be able to summarize them very, very rapidly and at a good enough degree of fidelity that you can understand what the competitor strategy is pretty quickly. And that is going to give you a working knowledge of the industry and competitors that makes you stand out. Because typically, you don't see someone dinged in loop feedback sessions for not having a high enough fidelity view of competitors. What they're dinged for in that area is not knowing competitors at all or not knowing the industry at all. And large language models can get you past that. So there you go. That is a series of 5 ways not to use large language models and 7 ways to use large language models as you're going through your application and your job search process. AI is a powerful tool for helping. You just need to use it in a way that supports your overall journey and your ability to stand out. And that's what I wanted to call out here. Let me know what I missed in the comments.